tayo po ay magpapatuloy sa ating mga usapin tungkol sa ating pinag-uusapan every Sunday. So ngayon po ay nasa huling letra ng Will's Ministry. So nag-umpisa tayo doon sa W, worship. Pagkatapos po yung letter H ng Will's, yung hospitality. And then letter E is evangelism. Another letter E, the second E is equipping. And then letter L is leadership. And then the last letter is letter S. Letter S stands for social concern and special event ministry. Field of Harvest churches believe that Christ's compassion for the lost, poor, and needy should also be our concern. What is social concern? Social concern is when an individual or group is worried about a certain aspect of society. Ano ba yung mga issues na nangyayari sa paligid natin? Bawat mananampalataya ni Kristo, bawat church, dapat meron silang concern sa lipunang kanilang ginagalawan. Ano ba yung nangyayari sa lipunang kinalalagyan mo? Ano ba yung pangangailangan o maitutulong mo bilang Kristiyano na anak ng Diyos sa lipunang ginagalawan mo? You cannot ignore what's happening around us. Especially yung tinatawag nating social issues. Ngayon, ano ba yung mga social issues na gusto kong makita natin na dapat bigyan pansin, dapat bigyan mamalasakin ng mga anak ng Diyos? Okay. Poverty and homelessness, climate change, overpopulation, immigration stresses, civil rights and racial discrimination, gender inequality, yung healthcare availability, childhood obesity, yung mga example. Ngayon, pag-usapan natin yung biblical perspective in social concern. What does the Bible say about social concern? In Isaiah chapter 58 verses 6 and 7, sabi ron, hindi baga ito ang ayuno na aking pinili. Nakalagin ang mga tali ng kasamaan, pag-aanin ang mga pasal, at paging layain ang napipighati, at iyong alisin ang lahat ng atang. Verse 7, hindi baga ang magbahagi ng iyong tinapay sa gutom at dalhin mo sa iyong bahay ang dukha na walang tuluyan. Pagka nakakita ka ng hubad na iyong bihisan at huwag kang magkubli sa iyong kapwa-tao. Sinasabi mo Kristiyano ka, sinasabi mo righteous ka, sinasabi mo nakakilala ka kay Kristo, pero yung mga tao na sa panahon na sila'y nababalisa, nasa panahon ng pangangailangan, nasa panahon ng kasakitan, nasa panahon ng pangangailangan, nasan ka? Tinatago mo yung sarili mo, iniiwas mo yung sarili mo sa kanila. Ito ba yung tunay na religyoso? Ito ba yung tunay na righteous man? Binibigyan ng emphasis sa mga sandaling ito, tayong mga Kristiyano, nararapat na imulat ang ating mga mata sa mga nangangailangan. Maging bukas palad sa mga kapuspalad. Ito yung challenge. Doon sa social concern na tinatawag. And that is what biblical views of social concern. Sa mga nangangailangan, tulungan mo sila. Sa walang pagkain, bigyan mo sila. Sa walang tirahan, bigyan mo ng kanlungan. Parang mahirap. Kung titignan natin sa perspektibo ng ating mga matambang tao, parang mahirap. Iiwas tayo. But then, as believers of Christ, we need to. Because of what Christ has done on the cross of Calvary, what has Jesus. Yung compassion ni Jesus. We have the compassion of Christ. Alam niyo, madali lang kapag sinunod mo yung gusto ni Jesus. So maganda yung maging damdamin natin. Bukas palad sa mga kapus palad. Very specific na gusto kong pag-usapan natin ngayon in regarding social concern. Caring for the poor and marginalized. In Proverbs 31 verses 8 to 9, speak up for those who cannot speak. Hindi nangangahulugang pipito. Wala lang silang kakayanan na magsalita dahil pinipigil yung kanilang mga bibig to speak. Ikaw na merong kakayanan, please speak to them. Magsalita ka para sa kanila. Magsalita ka para sa kanila. At ang sabi ron, for the rights of all who are destitute. Pag sinabi nating destitute dito, yung mga walang kandili. yung inaayawan, yung tinatanggihan. At ang sabi ron, speak up and judge fairly. Defend the rights of the poor and needy. As Christian, tulungan natin sila. As Christian, sabi ni Jesus, love your neighbor, love your enemy. Wow. Alam nyo, yung klase ng pag-ibig na binigay sa inyo at naranasan natin kay Kristo Jesus, that is unconditional love. At kung yun ang gagamitin natin to love those unlovable person, you can love them. You can love them. You can hug them. You can help them. And that is what social concern is. Nakakalungkot kasi yung iglesia sa ating panahon, palasakit ng Diyos doon sa mga tinatalikuran, sa mga inaayawan, na-overlook ng church. Parang hindi nabibigyan ng pansin. No? Ang laging binibigyan ng pansin ng church yung spiritual na bagay. Pero yung kapitbahay mo na nandiyan sa tabi mo, na walang makain, walang trabaho, pero ikaw maganda yung kinalalagyan mo, hindi mo matulungan. You know why? There is three things kung bakit lack of knowledge, lack of concern doon sa mga poor and marginalized na tao. Unang-una, yung ignorance. Dahil sa kakulangan ng kaalaman o kabatiran sa salita ng Panginoon, dahil hindi na ituturo sa church, nalilimutan. Ang madalas pag-usapan yung spiritual na bagay. Nalilimutan yung mga physical na nakikita natin sa environment natin. So nagkakaroon ng kakulangan. And that is the reason why yung mga social issues sa life, no, hindi natin mabigyan ng pansin, hindi natin mabigyan ng, wala kang passion. No? Yung advocacy, wala. Bakit? Yung lack of knowledge. No? Yung pagiging ignorance. And then second, yung poor theology. The soul and the body. Physical, importante yan. Kaya nga nilagay ng Diyos yan sa buhay mo eh. Kaya nga si Jesus pinakita gaano kahalaga ang pagpapagaling, gaano kahalaga ang pagbibigay importansya sa physical. So ito yung naging yung poor theology. So binibigyan ng pansin ng church ngayon, puro spiritual. Nalimutan na yung kapitbahay na nagdurusa. Nalimutan na yung mga neighbor, yung kapwa-tao, na kung saan ay nangangailangan ng tulong. At isa pa rito, yung sin. Our tendencies towards selfishness and laziness tell us that it's just easier to ignore social issues. We tend to forget the poor, thinking that we cannot do anything about their poverty, or we convince ourselves that they are not our problem. We forget the poor, we forget the marginalized people. But the Bible is telling to us as a Christian, we need to have concern for them. We need to care for them. Ngayon, pag-uusapan natin sa mga sandaling ito, kung ano tinuturo ng banal na kasulatan in regarding caring for the poor and marginalized person. Makikita natin na ito ay tinuturo sa Book of Law. Ano ba yung mga Book of Law? From Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. And that is what the law, the Book of Law sa Bible. Tignan natin yung tinuturo ng kabuuan ng banal na kasulatan regarding those sa social concern. And then, the second is Proverbs. The Book of Proverbs is also teaching about caring for the poor and marginalized. And then the prophets, yung mga propeta. Now, sila Isaiah, sila Micah, sila Jeremiah, yan yung mga prophets. And then New Testament. Social concern in the law. In Exodus chapter 22, verse 21 to 23. Leviticus chapter 23, verse 22. In Leviticus chapter 25, verse 39 to 43. Deuteronomy chapter 15, verse 7 to 11. Ano ang sinasabi ng law regarding sa social concern? God command His people first to treat the poor and marginalized early. And then second, to make provision for them. One, allow them to be released every year of Jubilee. To give generously, not begrudgingly. Ngayon, punta tayo sa social concern in Proverbs. Proverbs 14:21. So Proverbs 14:31, Proverbs 28:27, Proverbs 31:8 to 9, Proverbs 19:17, Proverbs 22 verse 9, and then Proverbs 21 verse 13, Proverbs 22 to 22. Proverbs 29 verse 7, 17 verse 5, the last concern. Ano yung tinutulo ng Proverbs regarding dito sa sa poor and marginalized? Una, yung practices that are condemned. Ang sabi ron, oppressing the poor, mocking the poor, gloating over disaster, shutting our ears to the cry of the poor, exploiting the poor, crushing the needy in the court, closing our eyes to the poor, not being concerned about justice for the poor. Ignoring the poor shows just as much contempt for God as actively oppressing the poor. So ito yung mga kinokondemn ng Diyos sa Proverbs. And then, yung sa Proverbs, practices that blessed by the Lord. Being kind to the needy, lending to the poor, being generous, sharing food with the poor, giving to the poor, caring about justice to the poor, speaking out to those who cannot speak for themselves, judging fairly, defending the rights of the poor and needy. Eto mga kapatid, ang sabi ron, being kind to the needy, even equated with the honoring God. Kapag kind ka doon sa mga you honor God. Equated dyan, parehas. You want to honor God? Be kind to the needy. Ang sabi ron, while oppressing the poor, shows hatred for our Maker. Pag inoppress mo yung mga poor, tinakpan mo yung tenga mo, mga mata mo sa kanila, then you hatred for our Maker. How about social concern the prophet? Malachi chapter 3 verse 5, Isaiah chapter 10 verse 1 to 3. Sa prophet, yung Malachi chapter 3 verse 5 and Isaiah chapter 10 verses 1 to 3. Ang ibig lang sabihin dyan ito, God is speak through the prophets to rebuke Israel for their disobedience, including oppression, the poor, and marginalized, and lack of concern for justice. Social concern in the New Testament. James chapter 1 verse 27. Galatians chapter 2 verse 10. Acts chapter 6 verse 1 to 6. The early church modeled social concern. In Acts chapter 6 verses 1 to 6, 7 godly men were designated by the leaders of the church to focus their attention on caring for the widows. In 1 Timothy chapter 5 verse 3 to 16, Paul teaches about the common duty of the church to care for each member, especially for widows and those who have the greatest need. James chapter 1 verse 27, to look after orphans and widows in distress and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. James chapter 2 verses 1 to 8, he commands believer not to show favoritism because God has not chosen those who are poor in the eyes of the world to be rich in faith and to inherit the kingdom He promised those who love Him. Love your neighbor as yourself. Sa pagiging isang kapwa-tao, hindi lamang one-sided, hindi lang one way. Si Jesus, tinuro to. Sabi ni Jesus, be a neighbor to everyone in need. Sabi nga, maging kapwa-tao ka sa mga nangangailangan. Sabi ni Jesus, Jesus was teaching that a person should be a neighbor to everyone in need. Mga kapatid, Jesus was the ultimate neighbor whose compassion exposed the Jewish religious leaders' lack of concern for those who were perishing. And then sabi po ron, Jesus wrapped His teaching with the command that His followers were to live like the true neighbor, showing mercy to those in need. Matthew chapter 4 verse 23. Christ demonstrated care for the whole person, body and spirit. As His followers, we must demonstrate the same, not allowing bad theology, laziness, and poor excuses to keep us from addressing the social needs of our communities. Pick a call. Gawin natin yung gusto ng Panginoon in regarding social concern.